I've read a lot of different books on the subject of the rise of Christian nationalism and all the rest of it. I'm pretty well informed on this subject. The difference between me and Terry Gross and most commentators who have interviewed you is that I lived a big chunk of your book. I'm part of the history you're writing about. And just like when you see a movie, if they get the location wrong of the one place you know where something happened, it's like, then tell with the movie. I happen to know that diner. That's not what it's like. There's enough of your book. There's enough of Tim books where literally I was there, and we'll talk about it sometime in discussions, for instance, with Billy Graham on abortion in the Mayo Clinic when my dad and I sat down and tried to get him to join our side, and he refused because he said that he wanted to represent the love of Christ to people and not judge them. Little things like that we can talk about. Where I was actually on the spot. I sat with Billy in his room at the Methodist Hospital. Dad was at St. Mary's across the street getting chemotherapy. I talked to Dr. Criswell about the same thing when we were on the road, and it was, why aren't you on the stage with Dad endorsing us the way you were 3 years ago with How Should We Then Live? He said, because I disagree with you, I'm pro-choice. He didn't use the words pro-choice because it wasn't in the lingo then, but he said, I really don't think that the Bible speaks to this. So I only say all that, Tim, because I want people watching this to understand that I'm not, heaping praise on this book from a vacuum of just I happen to like it. It's a history book as well as many other things. And I personally, me, Frank Schaeffer, 71 years old, lived a big chunk of this history, was there, was part of it. This is an accurate, phenomenally beautiful book. And I thank you for it, Tim. Thanks for your time with me.
Frank, it's been a pleasure to join you and to talk with you. I've really enjoyed it. May I have 30 seconds to say something?
Please.
That was just that's been swimming through my brain since you had said something a few minutes ago about the underpinning of the book being that there is a true Christianity that we must be called back to. And you said that you're not sure that you've ever necessarily found it or know where to find it. One of the things that is so binary when you look at the story of Jesus and at the story of the birth of the church and throughout the ages, in times of fear, in times of insecurity, in times of great testing, the Christian can turn to one of two things. They can turn to the sword, or they can turn to the cross. The sword, going back to at least the Constantinian age, has been the default for many Christians. The belief that a political or military or state power can protect us and can strengthen us and can allow us to dominate a society and to defeat our enemies. And whenever they have tried to do that, the Christian witness has suffered as a result of it. Far less frequent in those times have people turned to the cross. And although they may see their influence or their power in a culture, in a society diminish, the strength of their witness as Christians grows exponentially. And the reason I say all of that is to say that for me, when I think back to, okay, what is the true Christianity here that we are trying to reclaim? Recall that Jesus's right-hand disciple, Peter, on the night of Christ's betrayal in the Garden of Gethsemane, Peter draws the sword and he cuts off the ear of the officer who's arresting Jesus. And Jesus rebukes him, says, those who live by the sword die by the sword, and he heals the man's ear, right? And it's the same Peter who later, before he is martyred for his belief and his following of Jesus, it is the same Peter who writes in his first epistle from Rome under brutal occupation, where the first century Christians are being tortured and martyred and fed to the lions and treated terribly. It is that same Peter who drew the sword to defend Jesus because he thought that they needed here's our Messiah. We've waited hundreds of years for him. He's going to conquer the Romans. He's going to make Israel great again. He's going to defeat our foes, and we're going to sit at his right hand in a kingdom here on earth. And so he draws his sword to protect Jesus in that moment. That same Peter, after his encounter with the risen Christ, writes in his first epistle that we, as we suffer and as we are beaten and as we are oppressed, that we take joy in those sufferings because they bring us closer to the cross. And that we are to pray and love, pray for, and we are to love the people who are persecuting us. So what could possibly explain the transformation in that short period of time from Peter who draws the sword to Peter who appeals to the cross when he himself is on the doorstep of being executed? It's a wonderful thing to contemplate. And I would just urge anyone listening, if they've ever had similar doubts, similar questions, to think to Peter and think to the one he followed and to the one he was so attached to personally, to understand the real difference between the sword and the cross, and which is the one that we as Christians are called to pursue.